Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we just wrapped up week 6 of the NFL in an incredibly low scoring week for fantasy football. So much to dive into in our week 6 recap. So if you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe right there for free, and cue the intro. Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football. And every week, I feel like I come in here and say, what a wild week in fantasy football. And this week, I'm not going to change it. This was insane. So many upsets. Pittsburgh won, Giants won, Jets won, just Falcons upset the 49ers. Just so much parity in the league these days that you don't know what's going to happen. So many performances we got to get into and break down. Trades are starting to swirl. So without further ado, let's get into our first headline. And first one, Broncos still suck. Glad we addressed that. Let's get into our second headline. Trades. The first trade has already gone down. That's going to be Robbie Anderson to the Cardinals. I don't anticipate that having too much of an effect on fantasy. Robbie Anderson is a little bit older as a wide receiver, especially with D-Hop coming back this next coming week. Rondale Moore should be taking an elevated step into that offense. I see Robbie Anderson as the third position in a kind of putrid offense over there in Arizona. So obviously, I know he was brought in to replace Marquise Brown, who could potentially be out for the rest of the season. RIP Hollywood. But I just don't see Robbie being that relevant. I wouldn't make any waiver moves, wouldn't make any trades for him, but this is a good segue into talking about trades and how you should approach them, what we should be looking forward from the trades from an NFL's perspective. Obviously, one of the main things that's going on this season in 2022 is there's a ton of disgruntled running backs. We're looking at Cam Akers, we're looking at Kareem Hunt, we're looking at Christian McCaffrey. So there are some running backs that could be on the move. And let's say you invested heavily into Javonte Williams, who's now out for the season. You had Elijah Mitchell, who misses 6 to 8 weeks and doesn't look to be back anytime soon. You employed a zero RB strategy, and that's just not working out. These are some guys that I think you can buy low on. And that's, you got to take that risk. If you're sitting there at, 2-4, 3-3 through 6 weeks, this is a time where you take that risk on those guys you think are going to be moved. Obviously, the Cam Akers owner is probably pretty dissatisfied with how Cam Akers has performed through the season, hasn't had a single good game, and is no longer going to be playing for the Rams. It's not a guarantee that he's traded, and there is a non-zero chance that he doesn't play the rest of the season, but that's the risk you got to take. You buy low on him and then hope he gets traded before the deadline, then you can start him somewhere else. A wide receiver that you could target would be DJ Moore. Obviously, DJ Moore owner is probably super disappointed through his performance for the first 6 weeks. The passing offense in Carolina has been absolutely abysmal. Again, we talked about Baker Mayfield having the worst grade since Jamarcus Russell in 2003. So again, he's on the trade block. We've seen multiple teams offer for him, including the Ravens. But again, this is a person you could go out, you can buy low, and then if he doesn't get traded, then that was a risk that you took and it didn't end up paying off. He's still a very talented wide receiver, but obviously you're buying low in hopes that he gets traded to an offense like a Green Bay Packers, like a Ravens, where he can be utilized. And obviously you can get a high return on investment and hopefully prep your team to really have an upgrade based on a team that's kind of out on their current player. So again, this is the risk reward that it comes to when you have to deal with trades, and just be mindful of those sort of things. Moving on to our number 3 topic. I mean, we talked about this last week, but there's just so much trouble in Lambeau right now that I have no idea what to do. I understand that this is a rising Jets team. We highlighted it in our matchups of the week. Not matchup of the week, but like matchups I'm looking forward to as going to be an interesting test for the Packers against a surging Jets team. But Sauce Gardner had one of the games of his life. I believe he's now the betting favorite for Defensive Rookie of the Year, which is absolutely insane. From the cornerback position, it typically goes to an edge rusher or some position that has a more statistical relevant position, with sacks, pressures, tackles for loss, that sort of stuff. But Sauce has just been that dominant, completely shut down Aaron Rodgers through the air. And again, they still are not finding their way with the run game. Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon were both pretty ineffective. So, again, a lot of people who were really high on this Green Bay backfield are probably stuck dealing, what do you do now? And I think at this point, through 6 weeks, I need to see it before I have restored confidence in the Green Bay backfield. So I'm pivoting to other options. We can talk about some of our waivers here, some of the more lower down running backs that I think I'm going to probably be pivoting to rather than A.J. Dillon going forward until I can actually see them put anything sort of close to a competent offense up there in Green Bay. And the last headline I want to cover is, okay, it's been 6 weeks. We can stop overreacting. The top end QBs have now come down to earth a little bit. I mean, through the first 5 weeks, we saw people talking about Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. Like, this is why you draft QB2 overall. This is why you go high on QB. And like, yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made for those high-end QBs, rushing QBs. They offer fantasy cheat code per se, but it's a long season. Injuries start to mount up. We've saw Lamar Jackson's efficiency decline as Rashad Bateman has gone out, and their passing game in the offense has been limited. Jalen Hurts, great production through the first 5 games, but obviously that can't be sustained. They did have a little bit of an easier schedule, and they do have one of the easier, I believe it's the 4th easiest strength schedule remaining in 2022, so he should have good matchups. However, when facing some of these better defenses, it's not going to be those 27, 28-point weeks that we've come to know and expect from Jalen Hurts. It's going to be more of a 16-point week like we saw from this past week. And Sirianni still heavily involves the run game. So this is why people will punt the QB position, will stream the QB position. We saw Matt Ryan put up the QB2 performance on the week this past week. So again, this is why streaming QBs is very viable. And while you do have an inherent advantage with some of those top end QBs, it takes about 6 weeks before those things come down to earth, before everyone starts regressing towards the mean and things start averaging out, and you realize, okay, this is why we don't take Patrick Mahomes in the first round. We don't draft QBs in the first round. We go for more skill position players because, again, just there's a vast there's much more depth at the QB position. There's much more points to go around. And obviously, when you only have one spot to fill, obviously different for Superflex, but the majority of the leagues that we deal with here are normal, standard 1 QB leagues. And when you're only starting 1 QB, there's plenty of QBs on the waiver wire to go ahead and flex in and out on a weekly basis. So just some headlines I wanted to recap. And now let's get into grading my guys. It was an okay week, not a great week, but we just got to get into it and rip the Band-Aid off. First off, it's going to be Geno Smith. Projected for 19.6 points. He finished up with 12.7 points. That's going to be a C-. A really, really disappointing grade for Geno Smith going against the 31st ranked pass defense in the NFL in Arizona. The thing is, you can't really have any fault with Geno's game plan or Pete Carroll's game plan because they won. Their defense actually held up really well against the Cardinals. The Cardinals couldn't put anything. They put up 3 points on offense. They had 1 defensive score. But Geno Smith didn't really need to do anything to win the game. They won handily. The 10-point differential in the end score between 19-9 doesn't show how wide apart this game actually was. Cardinals couldn't mount anything on offense, and all they did was have to run the ball with Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker had an amazing game, which I'm not surprised about at all. And Geno Smith overall had a really, really good game despite not putting up enough stats that were fantasy relevant. Again, this doesn't shake my confidence in Geno Smith. It just says that this was not a positive game script for him getting a ton of fantasy points. Moving on, Eno Benjamin. Projected at 13.3 points after James Conner was ruled out to injury versus Seattle. Again, a Seattle defense that was 30th ranked against the run, someone that you really were looking to take advantage of. He ended up with only 8 points, so we're going to go with a D+ here, grading Eno Benjamin. The process was there. We saw the opportunity. He had tons of work within the offense, but for whatever reason, Seattle defense just stepped up and completely halted any sort of forward progress with this Cardinals offense. Kyler couldn't get anything going. Marquise Brown was maybe relevant before he went out with injury. Again, when you lose your best wide receiver, currently it's obviously going to really hamper the offense. As we saw with Seattle Seahawks, they crowded the box. They stopped their run. They ended up coming in a lot more. They put a spy on Kyler Murray. They had a lot more blitzing and just really ultimately prevented him from doing anything in the run game, and obviously that kind of trickled down to Eno Benjamin as well. So the process was there, the thought process was there, but obviously injuries, we cannot predict those, and then just the overall inefficiency of Cliff Kingsbury to get anything going with the Arizona offense leads us to a D+ grade here for Eno. Ramondre Stevenson, pretty easy A+, projected at 15.2 points versus the Browns, ended up with 23.1 points. Obviously, definitely padded in with that last touchdown in the waning minutes from Bailey Zappi. Again, with Damian Harris out and with a rookie QB in the fourth round, we knew Bill Belichick was going to rely heavily on the run game here. And Ramondre Stevenson, I believe he's in his second year in the league. He's very explosive, very dynamic, and is capable of being that 3-down bell cow. So where I see him, as long as Damian Harris is out and injured, this could be Ramondre Stevenson. Could be a top 10 quarter running back over that time frame. I also think that once we get back, when we see this production from Ramondre Stevenson, he will be the number one back in this offense, taking over from Damian Harris. We've seen him with injury concerns. We've seen his explosivity decrease in the past year or so. So this is a great tale of things to come for Ramondre. A+ for sure. Number 4, Christian Kirk. Projected at 10.9 points, ended up with 8.8 points. This is going to be a C-. Again, Trevor Lawrence just vultured a lot of the touchdowns. We didn't see anything really go through the pass offense. They put up a respectable 27 points. Hopefully you would have seen Christian Kirk get in the end zone for one of those, but we saw Trevor Lawrence just really utilize a ton of himself running the game, and then it never just went to Christian Kirk. So finally, Indy gets a win against the Jags. We talked about how historically the Jags always had any number. However, they took over this one and broke that curse. And unfortunately, Christian Kirk, which I mean, it was a little dicey going on. I didn't really have many analytics here. I was just going off of the narrative of history. But, this Indy defense, while it hasn't played particularly well through the first 5 games, it certainly is good on paper. And when they have the chance to step up and when they have good days, they will certainly make plays like this and shut down the running game and the passing game. And obviously, Christian Kirk was severely impacted by that, so it's going to be a C-. Finally, last but certainly not least, Jalen Waddle. Expected at 12.6 points, comes out versus Minnesota with a 13.9 point fantasy week. I'm giving that a B+. Again, Minnesota, not the scariest defense to go up against. We saw Tyreek Hill have a pretty amazing game, getting upwards of 23 points against this Minnesota defense. You'd obviously hope Jalen Waddle to get more involved. He's been dealing with this injury bug. He left the game with a shoulder injury in the latter stages of the fourth quarter, so we'll have to keep monitoring on that. Obviously, he's still on 100% from the groin injury. So he came back to earth, regressed towards the mean, put up a decent fantasy game. Definitely didn't sink you the week. Definitely was not upset for playing him in my starting lineups, especially in a week that was so low scoring. The 13.9 points definitely helped drag me to a couple low scoring victories. But I still believe in the talent. I can't quit on Waddle, and hopefully this injury he can get over that and return to full strength, because when Waddle is 100% healthy, he is by far one of the more dynamic weapons in the NFL, not just on this Miami Dolphins team. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is going to eat into his production a little bit, but we saw the run game really never materialized, whether it's Chase Edmonds or Raheem Mostert. So B+ there for Jalen Waddle. And again, outlook looks positive. I'm going to continue to keep believing in the talent there. So grading my guys, just recapping that, Geno Smith, C-, but not concerned because of just the game script that ended up ensuing. Eno Benjamin, D+ with 8 points. Again, the process was there. I'm going to say that the analysis was correct in the way it should have played out. It just didn't play out that way due to injuries and other unpredictable circumstances. Ramondre Stevenson, obviously an A+ with 23.1 points. Christian Kirk with a C- and 8.8 points versus Indy when the Indy finally shed their demons against the Jaguars. And then Jalen Waddle rounds it out with a pretty solid B+ on the week, getting you 13.9 points. And again, just hope that man can stay healthy. So let's go into our studs of the week. Number 1, first time we've seen him on this week or on this list, and maybe we're getting a little bit back to the hot start or the hot finish they had last year, is Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Joe Burrow finishes the overall QB1 on the week and the overall point score with 32.5 points. Absolutely diced up the Saints through the air. Sorry, they weren't playing the Saints. Who are they playing? Well, it escapes me at this point, but absolutely diced up his competition through the air, through a ton of touchdowns, despite some poor performances from T. Higgins. Jamar Chase was an absolute beast. Definitely helped out with some yak to really pound home Burrow's numbers and really inflate his stats. So when you have a wide receiver with the caliber of Jamar Chase, you're always going to have that upside once you just throw him on a little pitch route or a slant route to get you a ton of touchdowns and yards. So that's what leads Joe Burrow here to 32.5 points. Second, obviously, you got to highlight Stephon Diggs. He might have to be retired because he's just that good at football. He's currently the wide receiver 1 on the year. His connection to Josh Allen is just absolutely something special and remarkable. Anyone who has Diggs, I know he fell to the second round, so anyone who took him in the second round is probably sitting really pretty in their fantasy leagues at the moment. Number 3, you already talked about Ramondre Stevenson. Again, we have a coach in Bill Belichick who loves to run the ball. He loves to establish it. Ramondre Stevenson does have that 3-down bell cow ability. He is dealing with a rookie QB who does not have the strongest arm. He's not going to have the full confidence of Bill Belichick to sling it all over the ground. So Ramondre Stevenson should definitely be carrying the bulk of this offense going forward, especially with Damian Harris out. He's going to be a top 10 back in weeks to come. Jamar Chase, obviously off the back of Joe Burrow. I think this is more a reflection of what Jamar Chase can do rather than Joe Burrow did, because a lot of the yards and points that Jamar Chase got here was the fact that he just kept breaking tackles, just absolutely eviscerating defenders. 28.7 points here, leading him to the overall wide receiver 1 on the week. And this is despite a few down weeks from Jamar Chase. This is why he's so special. This is why he went in the first round of drafts, because he can absolutely destroy a game like this. And finally, we have Deion Jackson, who was the waiver wire star with both Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines going up against a really, really plus matchup in the Jacksonville Jaguars, absolutely shocking them, getting 2 touchdowns, and basically was one of the focal points to help Matt Ryan drive Indianapolis to a crucial victory in the title for the best of the worst in the AFC South over the Jaguars. Some honorable mentions here. Obviously, we talked about Tyreek Hill. Again, as long as Jalen Waddle is injured, Tyreek Hill is still going to be very dynamic in that offense. 23.7 points is making me eat crow on my preseason takes. Mark Andrews is obviously just very special. And with Rashad Bateman out, he is carrying the entirety of that passing offense in Baltimore on his back. Plus, Lamar just has this unconscious connection with him and trusts him tremendously. So he finishes with 20.1 points. Juju, finally, after a really beautiful game last week, he finishes against a good matchup, a high-scoring matchup against Buffalo with 19.8 points. Also, let's talk about Chase Claypool with 19.9 points. The thing about Juju and Chase Claypool, yes, they have these weeks. Yes, there's going to be a little inconsistency. They both have offenses with tons of wide receiver options. For Juju, you also have Mecole Hardman, MVS, Sky Moore, Travis Kelce, and Chase Claypool's side. Pat Freiermuth was out, but he should be back soon. You have Deontay Johnson, you have George Pickens, who's tremendously talented. So they have these upside weeks, but I'm just not going to rely on them to be consistent fantasy options, even despite the past almost 20-point weeks that both of them put up. CMC, 19.3 points. Again, just really good at football. On the worst team in football right now with the Panthers. Have no qualms about calling the worst team in football. He will always get his targets. He will always get his rush yards. He's just that special of an athlete. So I never have any qualms about the state of the offense, who's playing quarterback, what matchup they're going against. CMC is just going to be number 1 by far and away. Breece Hall, 19.1 points, deserves a mention here because this is why you drafted him 101 in rookie dynasty leagues. This is why he went to the 4th round as a rookie. He's just really tremendous. We see Robert Saleh leaning into the run game pretty heavily up there in New Jersey, not New York. They play in New Jersey. They took care of business against a pretty talented Green Bay Packers defense, at least on paper. So my confidence in Breece Hall is sky high going forward. Leonard Fournette continues to do Leonard Fournette things. Obviously, Julio Jones, I don't think he'll play again this year in the NFL. Chris Godwin is still dealing with injuries. And Leonard Fournette is really the one that's been carrying the offense on his back. We talked about how he excels in that 5 to 7 yard pass range, which is also where Tom Brady excels. So it's like literally a match made in heaven for Leonard Fournette owners. Very excited for his prospects going forward. Michael Pittman finally returned to prominence after 4 weeks, either missing games or having pretty pitiful games. Looks like they finally figured something out in Indianapolis, or maybe they just played a really bad defense in the Jaguars. 19.9 points. And finally, Kenneth Walker III, 18.0 points. Absolutely loved what I saw from Kenneth Walker. Has tremendous ball skills, had that fake stiff arm, like the intelligence of this man when he runs is amazing. The hype last week was on Dameon Pierce and how many tackles he broke. Kenneth Walker had something ridiculous like 12 tackles broken in this game. Truly a great runner coming out of Michigan State there, and I'm very excited now that he has a backfield to himself. This is why you took him. And very excited to see what he can do going forward. I think he could be in that league winner potential. I expect to see him in the studs list quite a bit going forward. So those are all my studs. Now let's jump over into the duds section. Jeff Wilson Jr. That was just a really bad game, and I know a lot of people started him. I would recommend starting him even before the season even before this game because it was a really plus matchup against the Falcons defense, which is I believe bottom 5 in the NFL against the run. Plus, he has had a pretty good stretch of games, but he finishes with only 0.5 points. They got down really early. It was a very bizarre game script. Marcus Mariota had a really, really good game and played really, really well. And then just from the standpoint that when San Francisco gets down and they get into those in that positive game script for passing the ball, Kyle Juszczyk is going to be the passing down running back. So obviously the fumble of Jeff Wilson Jr. didn't help, but even if you noticed and watched the game, even after the fumble, Jeff Wilson was still on the field. He played 87% of snaps, which is still a tremendous snap share from your starting running back. It's just when you are trying to catch up and you're trying to throw the ball, Kyle Shanahan has a lot more trust as a pass catcher in Kyle Juszczyk, and he was taking a lot of the snaps when those dump-offs were coming and ended up in a really bad game script for Jeff Wilson. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 3.3 points, obviously very frustrating. We thought it was going to be a good matchup, a high-scoring matchup. It did not reach the record heights that we anticipated. It only ended at a total over-under of a total point scored of 44, much less than the projected 51.5 points. Obviously, a lot of people are saying, well, you should have sold high on Clyde. You should have sold high on Clyde. He's touchdown dependent. Okay, cool. I still don't buy into it. This is a tremendous defensive front, one of the best in the NFL in my opinion, with Boogie Basham, Von Miller, and Ed Oliver. I'm not going to freak out. I still think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is super talented. If someone really wants to freak out and sell low on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I will happily trade for him. I think he will be a league winner going forwards. I believe in the talent. I am not worried about Clyde whatsoever. Number 3, DK Metcalf, 4.4 points. Again, just a game where they didn't have to rely on the passing game. They got up early. Cardinals couldn't do anything, and they ran the ball with Kenneth Walker. Easy peasy. Doesn't say anything bad about DK Metcalf. Doesn't say anything bad about Geno Smith. Just puts it in a game script where they weren't needed. And that's just the way the NFL works sometimes. So DK Metcalf had a good game. It just didn't reflect well for fantasy. Number 4, J.K. Dobbins, and this is going to be, I know a lot of people were frustrated, but I want to talk about two things here. One, he had apparently some tightness in his knee in the first half, which is why he was pulled for the second half. Again, he had a pretty tremendous injury, tearing his PCL and ACL and also straining the MCL, which is why he took a little bit longer to come back more than the normal ACL recovery timeframe would be. And also we looked at Kenyon Drake, and Kenyon Drake actually looked really good in this offense. So I think going forward, it's probably going to be more of a committee back, which is not unfamiliar to the Ravens. They've done this quite a bit before, whether it was Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards, or the year prior where it was J.K. Dobbins, or the year after that where it was J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, or last year when it was Deontay Foreman and Deontay Foreman was the main back, but they also had Latavius Murray and Le'Veon Bell as well. So I think this is going to be shifting to a running back by committee under John Harbaugh in Baltimore, and I don't think you're going to see the upside of J.K. Dobbins in that one game where he had 20.5 points. Last one I want to highlight here is Garrett Wilson, 1.3 points. Maybe now you're starting to worry a little bit about your wide receivers for the Jets, just because we've seen how good both that dynamic duo of Breece Hall and Michael Carter have been in back-to-back weeks. Zach Wilson has been doing everything they've asked him to, and he's played really well despite not being good for fantasy. He doesn't have to throw the ball. He doesn't have to make these big-time throws. All he has to do is be a game manager and rely on the skill sets of his running backs because they are just that talented. Michael Carter, I still think, is very disrespected in the NFL as far as the talent he brings as far as a pass blocker and a goal line back. And if they're going to continue to win games this week, especially with Robert Saleh coming from the Kyle Shanahan tree of coaching, where they love to establish the run, I don't know if you have that upside that Garrett Wilson had when Joe Flacco was chucking the ball 56 times per game. So some honorable mentions here: Aaron Jones, 5.9 points. We talked about the major concerns that I have with the Green Bay offense. Mike Evans, 6.2 points. Again, the offensive line there in Tampa Bay is absolutely eviscerated, not allowing time for Mike Evans' routes to develop, which we see is leading to Tom Brady have a quicker time of release. So he's typically dumping it off to Leonard Fournette instead of allowing Mike Evans to run his routes, let those routes develop, and then throwing to Mike Evans. His time in the pocket is severely decreased from last year. So until they can figure out what to do with that offensive line, the Bucs wide receiver options are on a little bit of a stocks down situation. Raheem Mostert, 5.3 points. It's kind of like quarterback carousel down there in Miami. No one really knows what's happening. Hopefully Tua is back. I fingers crossed Tua is healthy. I really, really hope that he's healthy. That's what I care about more than anything, is that young man's health. But hopefully if he's healthy, he can establish a more consistent offense for the Dolphins. And with Raheem Mostert, again, we see this offense being leaned in more on the passing game. And also we're seeing Tyreek and Jalen Waddle take rushes out of the backfield. So again, Raheem Mostert upside is capped from that standpoint. Tyler Lockett, same vein as DK Metcalf, only 2.7 points. Again, a game script that didn't call for tons of passing. Kareem Hunt, 1.2 points. The Browns, no idea what the heck they're doing over there with Kevin Stefanski. You have a talent like Kareem Hunt and you're not using him. You got 5 total opportunities against the Patriots. I understand they got down early and became a very, very positive it became a very pass-heavy game, try and catch up very quickly, but Kareem Hunt is one of the best pass-catching running backs in the NFL. I'm not sure why you wouldn't use him. That's very frustrating. James Robinson, again, the Indianapolis front isn't bad. So while we hoped for a good game for James Robinson, 6 points from him, again, you still have DeForest Buckner. You still have a bunch of guys who can really clogged middle up there, and we didn't see too much come from either Fournette, Robinson, or Etienne, but if I had to go forward, I would think Etienne now has a firm grasp on the target share, snap share, and the passing down work in Jacksonville, so maybe he's taking over as a running back 1. James Robinson may not be the guy that we thought he was at the beginning of the season. Curtis Samuel, 1.6 points. He's not getting the rushing work that we saw earlier. Plus, with Carson Wentz having a broken finger, I think that it limits his upside as a downfield pass catcher. He might be a bench candidate going forward until we see what he can do with Taylor Heineke in the center. Tyler Higbee just wasn't really utilized. This is a product of the offensive line. With the offensive line being so banged up for the Rams, we see their tight ends being called in to block a little bit more. So while Tyler Higbee was on the field for over 70% of snaps, he was mostly called into a blocking role. And when you're blocking, you can't really catch passes. So I would maybe stay away from Tyler Higbee until that offensive line issue gets sorted out a little bit more. Romeo Doubs, again, Packers are just a mess all over the place right now. So 4.1 points from him. And then Dallas Goedert, 3.2 points. Obviously not something you were hoping for from him and this dynamic Eagles offense, but they pulled out the win. They find different ways to win. We've talked about this endlessly on this show where, listen, there's so many mouths to feed, whether it's Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, Miles Sanders, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts in and of himself, Kenneth Gainwell being thrown out on the field as well. Boston Scott actually looks good too. So you're not going to have tremendous fantasy production from every single Eagles asset every single week. They still managed to pull out the win because they play smart football under Sirianni. So Dallas Goedert had a great game, but just doesn't result that way in fantasy. So those are going to be the duds. Let's jump into waivers. A little bit of a drier waiver wire section, but some deeper guys that I think we should probably at least check out. Tyquan Thornton. This was his first game back after being on IR for the first 6 weeks, and he looked really good, caught 2 touchdowns, was heavily involved. The fact that Devontae Parker has been abysmal this season, Nelson Aguilar hasn't done much, Jacoby Myers can't seem to find the end zone. Tyquan Thornton was their second-round pick, high draft capital, very explosive, one of the fastest guys on that offense. I think he warrants a look going to the future. Number 2, in this horrible tight end landscape that we hate to deal with day in and day out. If you need a deep reach at tight end, Daniel Bellinger is certainly a guy to pick up. He's found the end zone 3 straight games in a row, and that's really all you can ask for is, like, listen, if you're getting 30 yards and a touchdown from your tight end, like if I get 9 points and touchdown from the tight end spot, like I'm thrilled. So as long as Sterling Shepard's out for the year, Kenny Golladay continues to be out. Kadarius Toney doesn't seem to understand how to come back from injury. And when your wide receiver room is being led by Richie James and David Stills, I think Daniel Bellinger is certainly a good option. And this Giants team actually appears to be good. So Daniel Bellinger is an option tight end going forward, especially if you're just trying to chase points Number 3, Kenyon Drake. Again, if this injury with the knee and tightness continues to persist with J.K. Dobbins, we saw how effective he was in the Ravens offense this past week, despite losing to the Giants. Again, any running back one is going to be beneficial, especially with buys coming up, especially with a lot of these injuries that are happening. So getting any running back one anywhere in the league is always going to be beneficial. So definitely try to get Kenyon Drake. I wouldn't spend a ton of fab on him, but if he's available, definitely go try to grab him. Number 3, Rondale Moore. Obviously, I don't think Robbie Anderson really impacts Rondale Moore's efficiency whatsoever. I believe they have more capital invested into Rondale Moore. Obviously, the staff knows him a lot more. They're going to work him into the offense a lot more with Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown out for at least 6 to 8 weeks, potentially the entire year. DeAndre Hopkins is coming back, but it's going to have a massive opportunity increase for Rondale Moore to step in. And if Kyler can actually figure out what's going on, could potentially be a decent slot starting wide receiver and maybe a desperation flex scenario. Also from the standpoint that I do want to point out that we've talked about that Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, they've just progressed as they've gotten healthier. Obviously, this injury to Marquise Brown is super duper detrimental, so we'll see if, and I do believe the Marquise Brown injury was what contributed heavily to their loss to the Seattle Seahawks, so we'll see if they continue to right the ship from that perspective or how detrimental this injury actually is going to be for them. And finally, we called this with Christian Kirk, and we looked at his schedule going forward and wanted to get you guys ahead, especially if you're streaming quarterbacks or dealing with some quarterbacks that have been major letdowns like Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. So the last guy I want to talk about here is Marcus Mariota. He should be sitting on your waiver wire after a few horrible games. He has a really, really good schedule coming up, including playing Carolina twice over the next 2 weeks. So if you're dealing with a bye week at all of the next few weeks, if you have Lamar Jackson or if you have Josh Allen coming up, definitely a guy that I would want to pick and stash now would be Marcus Mariota. He has that rushing upside. He has Arthur Smith, who has a ton of confidence in him. I don't think Desmond Ridder is coming in anytime soon, just based on the fact that they're continuing to win games and actually playing really well, despite being projected as a bottom 3 team coming into the offense or coming into the season. So yeah, Marcus Mariota is definitely a quarterback that I would stash and play on an as needed basis, and probably the best of the tier of flex quarterbacks after your generic top 10. So just to recap the waivers here, Tyquan Thornton, Daniel Bellinger, Kenyon Drake, Rondale Moore, Marcus Mariota are those guys that if you're dealing with injuries, dealing with bye weeks, are ones that I think you should reach for and should be the key pickups this week. So that does our recap. I have some stuff in the works trying to grow this channel, make it a little bit more exciting. So keep an eye out for some updates to the channel coming here soon. Again, want to continue to make this engaging and helpful for you guys. So obviously feedback is always appreciated. Leave it in the comment down below. But until then, hope you guys won. Hope you guys took it out on a week that was just absolutely wild and low scoring for fantasy. And I will see you in a couple days for that week 7 primer. Take care.